Camera on. Okay, so today you guys just chill out. You don't have to have your whiteboard anymore. I want you to just kind of chill out and just relax and listen to me. So I don't know about you guys, but when I was a little boy, I was fascinated by birds. I still am. I love birds. I think they're one of the coolest things in the world. And man, what does a bird do that all of us wish we could? Fly, right? I mean, from the very get-go, when people, before we figured out how flight really happened, people would make all these funky contraptions and put like cardboard wings on them, try to fly off their roof and all that stuff, to no avail, ending in probably a couple of broken ankles and some bad backs, right? Yeah. Flying is cool. Well, this guy I'm going to talk about today, he obviously did not invent flight, but flight fascinated him. And listen, this all happened before there were any airplanes. There was nothing for him to go by other than a bird. That's all he looked at. And he tried to sit there and he tried to figure out how this bird did what he did. And this man's name, let me see if I can find the correct, oh, wrong mouse, sorry. Let me see. So this guy's name was Daniel Bernoulli, and this is a picture of him. As you can see, very, very similar to Newton. I mean, he had long hair, very, very similar. They lived near one another, I heard, and I've read. They were buddies. So Bernoulli one day was really fascinated by all these birds flying. So he couldn't figure out what he was doing wrong. He did all these experiments, ran all these experiments on, how to fly, and he just couldn't figure it out. Well, one day, he would typically go and watch geese fly and take off from this pond near his house, right? And that's what fascinated him. He was like, God, I just can't figure it out. Well, lo and behold, one day he found a dead goose, okay? And he started looking at the wing, and he was like, I've been doing this all wrong. Everybody just thinks that a wing is going to be straight out and that's all you need. That's not really the case. And I'm going to start bringing up this stuff to you, and it's probably not going to make a lot of sense to you, but I hope it does. I'm going to try to relate it to a little bit of the weather. So Bernoulli, when he would go and watch these geese fly, he was like, what am I doing wrong? So what he did is he went and he looked at the thing that was most apparent was the wings. And he was like, God, I've been thinking about this all wrong. So he went and he started looking at this wing and he started dissecting it. And what he found was that the wing had a curve to it, and there was a little bit of a spot where it wasn't flat, it was more or less a curve. I know it's really hard to try to explain this, but it was more
like a tear shape?
kind of like that. It wasn't straight like you would think an airplane wing would be, right? Yeah. It had this curve in it. And this curve is what made the flight happen. Because he started figuring out, he's like, God, man, if I could make something that looked like this wing, maybe I could understand flight a little better. And this is going to trip you out a little bit because I know we've only talked about this type of pressure during weather, but this is also true in flight as well. So what he did is he went and he got this wing and he started to go through it, started running all these experiments, and lo and behold, he started to see that when wind went across a wing, that the air split. Okay, because just like you going through the wind, you're splitting the air, but you're not curved like this, so you don't get lift. The wing would cut through the air, and on the top part, it would cause a low pressure because the air had to bend around that curve. So it caused something called lift. All right, and that's one of the forces of flight, and that's why we call, I guess Air Jordan, Kobe Bryant, all those guys, they have lift as well. If you can jump off the air, if you can jump off the ground, you're exerting lift. You're going against gravity. But we can't fly, right? I mean, Michael Jordan, they said he could fly. He couldn't really fly. He could just jump really high. So this low pressure, this really fast moving air would go across this wing, and it would produce this effect that the geese could get off of the ground. So he studied that wing for a long time, and he's one of the ones that came up with the ways of this fluid dynamics, because the wing is going through air. It was like a fluid, and he came up with these 4 forces of flight, all right? And these 4 forces of flight are still intact today. And listen, if we didn't have these 4 forces of flight, nothing would ever be able to take off and nothing would ever be able to land. All right, and we're going to talk about these 4 forces of flight. So the 4 forces of flight are real simple. Obviously, on the bottom, you're going to have weight. Another way you could say that is that's going to be gravity. That's gravity pulling you down. You got to have gravity pulling you down. And why do you have to have gravity pulling you down? Well, if you didn't have gravity pulling you down, guess what would happen if you took off on an airplane? You would never ever land again. Okay, so gravity is really, really essential. Other thing you got to have is obviously lift. You got to get off the ground. That's really important. That's what he was talking about when he saw these geese flying. He's like, how in the world do they get off the ground? Well, he figured it out. And then you have something called thrust, which gives you power. And then you have something called drag. So those are the 4 forces of flight. Now, drag occurs all the time on everything wherever there's air. You have drag on you when you walk down the street. You're walking through air, which is a fluid in a way. All right, it is giving you, it is definitely a force trying to slow you down. Without this drag, you'd be able to go as fast as you wanted, right? If you lived in space, there is no drag. So you gotta have drag, because if you didn't have drag, the plane would never ever be able to slow down. Geese would never ever be able to slow down, and probably you wouldn't be able to slow down either. Drag is just another cool way of talking about friction. All right. So these 4 forces of flight, you gotta have all 4 of them to have flight. All right. So let's keep going. Now, drag can be exhibited in a lot of ways. Obviously, if you're a skydiver, drag's really important, because if you don't wear a parachute when you're skydiving, you're gonna die, right? And that's what slows you down. Also, this right here, some of you kids might not know, that is the space shuttle. The space shuttle is an enormous, enormous machine. And when it comes back down, it's got a lot of inertia. It's a really fast moving object that's got a lot of weight. And when it lands, they pop that parachute out so that it can slow down enough to the point where it can stop. If they didn't do that, they've got a multi-billion-dollar machine sitting there going way too fast down a runway that's way too short. It's going to go off the runway and possibly fall off the runway and explode. So they didn't want their billion-dollar aircraft to do that, so they were really smart, and they popped a parachute on the back of it. Pretty bright, right? Yeah. So let's watch this real quick. I'm going to show you something, new age type of, let me see. I don't think this is the one I want to see. Hold on, let's go. If you're looking for any vacation rentals, VRBO is really good. Okay. Now, this right here is one of the largest planes that we have in our Air Force or in our armed forces. And this is a B-52 bomber. Basically, this B-52 bomber is exactly what it's what it's called. It bombs things. It carries tons and tons and tons of bombs, and it goes over places and it just drops tons of bombs. It's not a fighter jet. So this is a streamlined vehicle, but it doesn't have a lot of, it's not very maneuverable like a smaller jet that can go and bomb places really quick. This is something that goes really high up in the air, drops hundreds of bombs, and then it comes back. Well, like we talked about, and this is Newton's second law, force is equal to mass times acceleration. When this puppy gets going, it takes a long time for it to get going, but it also takes a lot for it to stop. And that's one of the things we're gonna look at today, and this drag is really cool. So watch this thing come in and land, and watch what it does. It's pretty cool. Let me turn up the volume a little bit. You can hear a couple of birds singing. So here it comes, and look at how many wheels it's got. Not a typical airplane, right? I mean, it is a huge piece of machinery. And I know it looks like it's going slow, but when you get this fast moving object, I mean this big heavy object going fast, it's really tough to stop. So watch what happens when it lands. Gage, can you see, buddy? Then it pops out its parachute. Now that is drag. And listen, that thing is so heavy and going so fast that they have to put that parachute on there. If they didn't, it probably would not be able to work. Okay? So let's keep going there. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is something I know a friend in my class is going to love.
Yeah.
And that's Mr. Aiden Michael. He's a space nut.
Yeah.
And this right here is going to be thrust. All right, so thrust means that something's coming out of the back of something, or possibly the front. I mean, if there's a propellered airplane, the thrust, that's where they get the power from to move forward. But on this particular object, this is the space shuttle getting ready to take off. And as you can see, it's in a vertical position. So obviously, in
Mr.
order...
Allen?
Yes?
We have a question over here, Porter.
Okay.
He's asking, is that the biggest plane in America?
I'm going to show you the biggest plane I've ever seen in just a minute, Porter. But I think as far as being active, I'm not sure. I would think so. I'm not sure though. That's a good question. Maybe you could look that up later and you could tell me. But I think a B-52 bomber, there's not too many planes that are bigger than a B-52 bomber. There might be a few that carry supplies and stuff like that, but they're not planes that need to get in and out of places where they do a bombing run. These are things that like go and drop tanks off and stuff like that. So they might be a little bigger. I know that plane looked huge, and it is huge, but it is a very streamlined machine. It is meant to get in and out of the places as fast as possible, because obviously, I mean, if you go and you drop a bunch of bombs on somebody, do you want to sit there and hang out for a little while?
No.
I don't think that's a good idea. So you're talking about something that's like 7-8 miles up in the air, right on the brink of the stratosphere, dropping these bombs, because obviously they don't want to be detected, right? That's a good question, Porter. So this is going to be some incredible thrust you're about to see, and this is probably one of the most powerful things you're ever going to see. As far as I can tell, the space shuttle taking off requires an enormous amount of power. And the reason it does is because, like I told you, in order to get to outer space, you have got to be going really fast. And like I told you before, and I know you didn't remember this, the space shuttle goes about 12,000 miles an hour. And that blows my mind that I thought I read it wrong the first few times. 12,000 miles an hour. I can't even imagine how fast that is. That's just so fast. But you got to understand, it's got 5 engines that are pumping out thrust. And we're going to look at those engines. 2 of these guys, you'll see on the side ones and the one in the back, they kind of float off before it gets into orbit and they fall in the ocean. And the reason they're there is to add the fuel, because basically this guy taking off is kind of like a firecracker. It's kind of like a huge firecracker going off. It's a controlled explosion, and sometimes this explosion can go wrong.
Yes.
Not today. It's not going to go wrong today. This is pretty cool. But let's just sit back and watch this. All right. So these three engines, I know it's hard to see, but they're gonna start firing. Now there's the thrust, okay? And guys, this is also Newton's third law, action, reaction. Because as soon as the engines start pushing, that's the action. The reaction is for it to get lift, okay? Okay, so there's the thrust. And look at it, already starting its little curve on its backside.
Houston now controlling the flight of Atlantis. The space shuttle spreads its wings one final time for the
This is the last time it took off too. So you can see the enormous amount of thrust coming out of those engines is just extremely insane.
run to orbit. 4.5 million pounds of hardware and humans taking aim on the International Space Station.
There we go, that's real time. You see how fast that sucker's going? So look, it got rid, hold on, it should be getting rid of its,
Reducing stress on the shuttle as it goes transonic for the final time.
I think it might do it in like.
yeah, it should be kicking those things off in just a second.
It's gonna do it in the past 2 minutes.
It should be doing it real soon, Aiden.
The boosters usually test after like 2 minutes, somewhere around 2 minutes.
Alright, so it's still going up. I know you guys are having a hard time seeing it. It's really tough to see it right here. There it is right there. You can barely see it. There you go. Going through some clouds.
That call from Captain Barry Wilmore, a transducer, instrumentation only, no action required.
When was this? Huh? When was this?
Wasn't too long ago.
In 2011. So
Okay, so you can see it's almost going vertically with, I mean, it's going like horizontally with the atmosphere almost. And it should be kicking those things off in just a second. I don't know what's taking so long.
Atlantis traveling almost 2,600 miles an hour, 21 miles an
While
hour.
you're waiting for it to get kicked off, Mr. Allen, I had a friend who went to NC State, an engineer, he worked on that shuttle.
That's awesome. All right, here we go. I think they're about to pop off right now.
1.
I actually had
Boom,
tickets to
there
go
they
on.
go. So there's one of the rockets going off.
The
Booster officer confirms.
And guess what?
Solid rocket boosters.
Another force of flight. They're gonna fall to the ground because of gravity. Well, actually, into the ocean.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So that, my friends, is thrust. All right, and listen, it's not just equated to flight, guys. I mean, you could sit there and say, hey, I'm gonna really start pedaling my bike really fast. You know, sometimes you just coast down a hill and then all of a sudden you kick it into gear and you start pedaling harder. That could be considered thrust. A lot of different ways you could look at thrust, all right? Now, man, I got like 7 minutes. All right, hold on one
You're
second.
good, Mr. Allen.
Huh?
I said, you're good.
Okay.
We're very interested in this, so you're good.
All right. I don't want to show you that today. All right. So what I'm going to do now is, Porter, I'm going to show you something really cool.
Actually, he has a question real quick.
No, I don't want to answer Porter's question.
They're,
He's-
they're very interested over here. He was wondering how long it took them to get to the moon in that particular rocket.
To the moon?
Mm-hmm.
They weren't going to the moon. Space shuttle doesn't go to the moon, Porter.
The
We haven't gone to the moon since
The
when?
Saturn V goes to the moon.
1969?
It was like 69 or 70, wasn't it, Aiden? I'm not sure. It's been a long time since we've gone to the moon.
Didn't the Apollo go to the moon?
Yeah, but that was 69.
1969 is when the Apollo
Yeah.
11 landed
So that
on
we've
the
only been one
Artemis
time,
rover
Mr.
in
Allen?
low Earth orbit.
Huh?
We've only been one time to the moon?
No.
I think there's been a
seven.
couple of times.
Seven times.
Seven
Okay.
times? Well, Aiden Michael says 7, but he also said that Neptune had 14 moons, and I knew it was like
Neptune
Yeah, I
80.
can look it up real
14.
quick.
Saturn has 82.
Saturn has 82, my fault, man. Anyway, yeah, we don't really go to the moon much anymore, but I will show you a cool picture tomorrow. They actually have evidence that we were on the moon. There's actually like footsteps, and there's actually tire tracks from what they rode around
Is there a flag on it?
on the
Yes.
moon. And there's supposedly a flag, but I don't have a picture of that exactly. This is taken from a satellite above the moon. It's really cool because, you know, there's a lot of people out there that, you know, kind of say we didn't go to the moon, you know, and this is evidence that we did.
I just looked it up. The United States has sent 6 crewed missions to the moon that landed a total of 12 astronauts, all men, from 1969 to 1972.
Oh, yeah.
And a
72.
series of
I
Apollo
forgot that
missions
Apollo
numbering up to
was
Apollo
did it
7.
on the moon.
That was the year I was born. So, you know,
Very cool.
maybe I came
forgot
from
that
the moon, who
Apollo
knows?
did it land on the moon.
Yeah, Noah.
By the way, this is not my room.
That's all right. We didn't know if you had frilly curtains or not. It's all right, buddy. So I'm gonna end this lesson today with something really interesting, and you guys might not find it interesting at all, but I kind of do. I know you guys have never heard of a man named Howard Hughes because he's been dead for, I think he died in '76, so he's been dead for about 44 years. But he was one of the richest men. Back in the day, he did all kinds of cool stuff, man. He was a video director. He was an award-winning producer of movies. He was a great engineer. He was a great he was a great pilot. He loved to make airplanes, and he was extremely, extremely rich. Like Bill Gates rich back in the day. He was one of the most wealthiest men on earth back when, in like the 40s and the 50s. So he was a very, very prolific man, but he was kind of an odd duck. He had something called OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder. I have a little bit of it. I mean, sometimes I get a little bit germophobic. But if this guy were alive today and COVID were going around, he probably would have lost it because there were no pandemics going on back in the day, but he had to have everything clean. He was a super clean freak. He was scared to death of germs. He's kind of a strange guy because he had to eat the same exact dinner every night. It was steak medium rare, a salad, and green peas. And most of the green peas, he would throw the bigger ones away and keep the smaller ones. He only ate eggs from his one person that cooked him eggs his whole life, this lady named Lily. He would only eat eggs from her. Well, unfortunately for him, his mind got the best of him. I mean, this guy lived a huge life of luxury, and you're talking about super rich guy, super rich, very, very famous guy, but he kind of started losing his mind a little bit when he got older. And his fingernails got really long, and he started just laying in bed all the time. He ended up dying in bed, but he made this huge plane. And the reason he made this plane is because he was a very avid pilot. Okay, and he would fly and make all kinds of planes. He did a lot for aeronautics, which is the flight. But he made this thing called the Spruce Goose, and I'm going to show you a video of it. It's the only time the plane has ever flown, and it didn't get off the ground very far. It just got off the ground a little bit. It was one of the planes. It's basically always in the water. I don't know what you call those type of planes. It didn't land on land. It just landed in the water. It was way too big to be able to land on land. It was too much force. Back in those days, they just didn't have that engineering. So I'm going to show this to you, and they're going to give you a little bit of background on, the plane and stuff. But I think it's really interesting. And Porter, this was the largest plane back in these days. I mean, it was by far the largest plane. It was an engineering marvel, is what they called it. When you look at it, you're gonna be like, whoa, that thing can get off the ground? Well, off the water. So watch this. This is pretty cool. Definitely a weird dude. Hold on, let me see, where is it?
The floor.
I know it's here. Oh, here we go. All right. Oh, here we go.
With the sweat of my life into this thing, I have my reputation rolled up in it, and I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it.
All right, so this guy right here knows all about the plane, and he's going to talk to you about it. That is it right there. But you can't really tell how big it is yet.
We can't hear.
Less than a mile. It never flew again. Didn't blow down. So he went ahead, came back to the doctor, and he goes, "What were you thinking? What were you doing?" Howard, well, it just got away from me. I'm sorry. I can't help it. It's what the airplane did. He did that, ladies, to prove that he had his reputation on the line. He had to prove that it would fly and it would work. But it never flew again. Long ago.
So,
Bought it back for $800,000. hermetically sealed, it's all pressurized and nothing goes wind.
So that's the building it was made in.
In a
Hold on, it will show you another picture.
big dome, 33 years at the tune.
Oh my goodness.
So they had to put it on this thing right here to put it into the water. Basically, this guy is saying that the reason he wasn't even supposed to fly it, he wasn't supposed to take it off the water, but everybody said, they were like, there's no way that thing will fly. It's way too big. It's way too big. And he was like, look, my reputation's on the line. I'm going to fly it. And so when he got out there and he started going down the water, he picked it up off the water a little bit. They thought that it was going to break all apart. And that's the only time it ever flew. It's in a museum now, I'm pretty sure. I don't know what museum. It has to be a really big museum. So I know these pictures aren't really good, but
And the Aero Club of Southern California came along. A lot of power juice in mine means they were
6 propellers.
Six.
Nobody's gonna cut on this. So they put this out for bid from all these companies. Pratt & Whitney wanted engine, Smithsonian wanted their cockpit. They're gonna cut it up. They're gonna slice it up like salami. And the Aero Club kids, nobody's gonna cut on it. Allegedly, Mr. Smith got this for $1. So he bought it. He bought it for $1. It cost him over $7 million to get it up here.
so there's the nose of it. And that's it without the wings on it.
The museum.
And those are the wings right there. And there's Howard Hughes right there, getting ready to fly this thing. And that's looking out the cockpit. I don't know what that is. I'll try to get some better pictures for you tomorrow. But yeah, it was an engineer in marble. And like, Howard Hughes is the one that designed it. So he's a really smart dude, but man, he had a lot of problems. That's for sure. Yeah, Joey.
No, I was stretching.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, Porter.
That I couldn't stretch it.
Hold on.
So Porter's saying, is he rich because he flew the plane, or was he rich before he flew the plane?
No, Porter, he was an extremely rich man before this plane was built. And that's what enabled him to be able to build this plane. He was, like, when you saw him sitting there in that plane, he was in the later years of his life when he was kind of like losing his mind. Because he became obsessed with building this plane. And a lot of people, his friends and stuff, said that was the death of him. That's why he died such early age and why he went into such bad health, is because everybody kept telling him this thing's never gonna fly. And he was like, yeah, it is. It's gonna fly. You wait and see. And he spent all this time putting into it, and it did fly. But he made a lot of money. I mean, he was an engineer. He was a huge Hollywood guy. He was a director. And his movies made tons of money. In fact, if you look at him now, I think he was worth like $20 billion. If you look at him today, back when he was really famous, like 65 to 70, 1970, he had about $2 billion. So that equivalent today is like, 15, $20 billion. That's a lot of money. And he wasted it. He didn't waste it. He just did what he wanted to do. And like I told you, he was a big advocate of aviation. He loved to fly. And that pretty much is what put him in the grave, they say. It's really sad, but the guy had other problems, man. I mean, he was obsessed with like cleanliness. He would wash his hands 50 times a day, and but later towards the end of his life, they said that his fingernails got real long, and his toenails got real long, his hair got real long. He just didn't take care of himself. And he ended up dying of kidney failure when he was on a flight from one of his houses to another. He just died in midair. And they said that everything was great. His heart was great. His brain was great, everything was intact except for his kidneys, and they kind of failed him. And I don't know why they couldn't figure that out back in those days. It's kind of odd, but I mean, you know, hey man, we all go through our problems, I reckon. But yeah, that's all I got. I hope you guys enjoyed that. But